She walked into the bank with a check for $842 million 0 cents and walked out in tears. They laughed at her shoes, called her a fraud, and dragged her out in front of strangers. 10 minutes later, Keanu Reeves found out. What he did next wasn't just revenge. It exposed a secret connection decades in the making. Before we continue this incredible story, let us know where you're watching from. If you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel, because tomorrow we have another inspiring story you won't want to miss. Leah Martinez stood at the bottom of the stone steps outside Goldshire Trust Bank, the wind tugging gently at her jacket. In one hand, she held a worn leather briefcase. Inside it, a certified cashier's check for $842 million 0 cents. Her other hand trembled as she smoothed her skirt. This wasn't just another errand. This was the largest financial transaction she'd ever been trusted with. She took a breath and stepped inside. The lobby was enormous. Polished marble floors, vaulted ceilings, gold trim on everything from the teller counters to the elevator doors. It smelled like expensive cologne and bureaucracy. Conversations echoed faintly. Men in suits tapped impatiently at their watches. Women in heels carried handbags worth more than Leah's car. And there she was, walking across the vast floor in a navy blue blazer from a department store clearance rack and heels she'd had resold twice. She walked with her head high anyway, because the check was real, the instructions were clear, and Keanu Reeves trusted her. Leah had been Keanu's executive assistant for 3 years. Discreet, efficient, detail-oriented. She was the one he relied on for sensitive contracts and quiet logistics. This particular task was part of a confidential acquisition, the kind of project that didn't hit the press until it was already done. She approached the line with calm professionalism and took her place behind a man loudly discussing yacht upgrades on his Bluetooth headset. Leah glanced at her phone. She had 35 minutes to deposit the funds, initiate the wire transfer, and return to the office for a 2:00 p.m. strategy call. The line moved slowly. She clutched the briefcase tighter and reminded herself to stay calm. She had everything: documentation, authorization letters, notarized signatures. She had run the checklist twice before even leaving the office. The teller window opened. Next, she stepped forward. The name tag on the teller's chest read Brian Holloway. He was maybe 30, clean-cut, with a tight haircut and a practiced smile that didn't reach his eyes. As Leah approached, his gaze dropped from her face to her clothes, lingering a beat too long. His smile faltered. "Can I help you?" Leah placed the briefcase gently on the counter and opened it with practiced care. She removed the cashier's check, the letter from legal, and her ID. "I need to deposit this into our trust account and initiate a wire transfer. The authorization letter is from Mr. Keanu Reeves. His contact information is included if you need verification." Brian didn't touch the documents. He stared at the check for a moment, then back at her. His expression changed, just slightly, but enough. Leah felt it, the shift, the suspicion. "This check says $842 million. That's correct." His voice got louder than it needed to be. "Ma'am, this is $842 million. Heads turned. Conversations quieted. A few people in the lobby glanced up from their phones. Leah could feel the shift in atmosphere like static in the air. She nodded calmly. "Yes, I'm aware. That's why I brought full documentation." Brian still hadn't looked at the papers. He finally picked up the check, holding it between 2 fingers like it might stain him. He inspected it, then looked her over again, this time more slowly. His gaze dragged from her modest earrings to her plain shoes. "You said this is from Keanu Reeves?" "Yes, I work for him directly." His eyes narrowed. "And you're depositing it in person, dressed like that?" The comment wasn't explicit, but it didn't need to be. Leah's stomach tightened. Her voice remained steady. "I have identification, a signed letter of authorization, and our legal team's contact info. You're welcome to verify any part of this." Brian gave a tight laugh. "Look, lady, I don't know what kind of stunt you're trying to pull here, but people who deal in this kind of money, they don't take the subway, they don't wear knockoff pumps, and they don't carry briefcases that look like they've been through a thrift store fire sale. Leah's cheeks flushed. She opened her mouth to speak, but nothing came out. The words were there, but the shame was faster. I assure you, everything here is legitimate. Just please call the number on the letter. Mr. Reeves will confirm everything. Brian glanced toward the security desk. Then, without warning, he pressed a small button beneath the counter. Leah froze. Ma'am? I think we're done here. This check is clearly fraudulent, and I'm going to have to ask you to leave before this becomes a bigger issue. It's not fraudulent. I'm trying to do my job. Brian leaned forward, lowering his voice but sharpening it. If this is some kind of prank, you're going to regret it. This kind of behavior, trying to launder money, impersonate a corporate agent, it's criminal. I'm not impersonating anyone. Please, just call his office. Or call the legal department. I have the number here. Brian leaned back in his chair and crossed his arms. 2 uniformed security guards had already begun walking toward them from across the lobby. Leah felt her throat tighten. Her vision blurred for a second. No part of this felt real. One of the guards, tall and stone-faced, stepped beside her. Ma'am, we're going to need you to come with us. She looked back at Brian, pleading, just make the call, please. But Brian was already turning to the next customer in line, waving his hand dismissively like she was some minor disruption. Next. The 2 security guards flanked her, one gently touching her elbow. Ma'am, let's not make a scene. Leah's voice cracked as she tried one last time. I work for Keanu Reeves. You're making a mistake. A man near the back of the lobby raised his phone and started recording. Another whispered something to his partner and laughed under his breath. Leah's heart pounded in her chest. She felt everyone's eyes on her, judging, mocking, assuming. This can't be happening. But it was. The guards didn't push her, but they didn't give her a choice either. They walked her across the marble floor, past rows of customers and polished columns. Each step echoed. The silence in the room was deafening. The kind of silence that follows a public shaming. When they reached the door, one guard pressed the buzzer, and the massive glass panels slid open with a hiss. The afternoon sunlight hit Leah's face like a slap. The world outside looked unchanged, but inside something had broken. As the doors closed behind her, she stood on the sidewalk, still clutching the briefcase. People walked by, barely noticing her. A woman who had just been holding nearly $1 billion was now just another stranger on the street. Her hands trembled. Her knees felt weak. She stepped aside and walked a block down to a corner cafe. The doorbell chimed as she entered. She found an empty table near the back and sank into the wooden chair. Her breathing was shallow, her chest tight. She set the briefcase on the table and stared at it like it belonged to someone else. Then she pulled out her phone and dialed the number. Keanu answered on the second ring. Leah, how did it go? She couldn't speak for a second. Her mouth opened, but nothing came out. Her voice was buried beneath 1,000 emotions, all colliding at once. Keanu, she finally whispered, we have a problem. He didn't say anything right away. I was kicked out of the bank. They thought I was a fraud. They didn't even check the paperwork. They just looked at me and decided I didn't belong there. Silence on the line. They called security. I was walked out in front of everyone. People filmed me. I didn't know what to do. I had everything you gave me. I did everything right. Still silence. Leah wiped her eyes quickly. I'm so sorry. Then Keanu spoke. His voice was calm, too calm. Which branch? She pulled the business card from her coat pocket. Goldshire Trust, 5th Avenue, branch number 117. Thank you, Leah. Go home, rest. But you did your job. I'll take care of the rest. The call ended. Leah sat at the cafe table, her hand still holding the phone. She didn't know what Keanu was about to do. But in 10 minutes, the people at that bank would start to realize they had made the biggest mistake of their professional lives. And it was already too late to undo it. Keanu was sitting in a glass-walled conference room overlooking downtown Los Angeles. The team was gathered around the table, laptops open, projections on the screen, contracts in neat folders. A major distribution deal was on the line, one that had taken 6 months to negotiate, but as he stared at the stack of legal documents in front of him, his phone buzzed once in his pocket. Leah. He excused himself quietly, stepped out, and answered. Her voice came through like static behind glass. She said his name once, but it was cracked with breath. Then again, steadier. Keanu. We have a problem. She explained everything. The check, the line, the way the teller looked at her clothes before he looked at her credentials. How no one read the paperwork. How they laughed. How they escorted her out like she was a criminal. Keanu didn't interrupt, not once. He listened as she reached the part about being filmed, about the phones raised like weapons, about the silence that had crushed her after the guards let her go. He could hear her trying to keep composure, trying not to cry in the middle of a coffee shop. Her voice would falter, then straighten again like she was standing at attention inside herself. When she finished, there was a long pause. Then came the only question that mattered to him. Which branch? She read the number from the card she'd taken as she left. Branch 117, 5th Avenue. Thank you, Leah. Go home. You did everything right. But Keanu? That's enough. Get some rest. I've got it from here. He hung up. Inside the conference room, the team was still talking, debating bullet points on a slide deck. His assistant, Mara, noticed him standing by the window and called out, Keanu? We need your sign-off on Clause 17. He looked back at her, then at the room. Reschedule it, he said. All of it. Mara blinked. Sorry, what? Keanu's tone didn't change. I said move the meeting. I've got something more important to handle. He turned away and walked to the far side of the room, where the sunlight poured through the glass. His reflection hovered against the window, a silent silhouette over the skyline. He pulled out his personal phone, not the business line, not the publicist's number, his own. He tapped a single contact. A man picked up on the first ring. Keanu didn't exchange pleasantries. He simply said, I need the paperwork to acquire a minority stake in Goldshare Trust. There was silence on the other end. Then, how much of a stake are you thinking? Keanu paused. Enough to own Branch 117? The man on the other end of the line, Mark Evanston, had known Keanu for years. He wasn't just a financial consultant. He was the one Keanu called when something had to be done quietly but permanently. Mark didn't question the reason. He never did. I'll initiate the acquisition prep through shell proxies, Mark said. But it'll take at least 24 hours to process the regulatory filings. You've got 6, Keanu replied calmly. Mark exhaled. That's not how this usually works. Keanu stepped away from the window, voice even. Then let's make this the exception. There was a short pause. I assume this is personal? It's ethical, Keanu said. The moment they saw Leah, they didn't see value. They saw doubt, and they acted on that without reading a single word. Mark didn't argue. He only asked, Do you want the board to know it's you? Keanu thought for a moment. No, not yet. He ended the call and slid the phone back into his coat pocket. Across the office, Mara was still holding the contract packet. She looked like she wanted to say something, but she didn't. She just gave a tight nod as he walked past her, heading toward the elevator. By the time the steel doors closed, Keanu had already sent one more text to a man named Alonzo Vega. Alonzo was a retired federal banking examiner who now worked as an independent investigator. Keanu had helped him once, years ago, during a time when Alonzo's daughter needed life-saving surgery her insurance wouldn't cover. Keanu had paid the bills anonymously. Alonzo never forgot. So when Keanu texted, "Need a favor, Branch 117, full profile, discreet," the reply came back within seconds on it. Keanu arrived home 40 minutes later. He changed out of his suit and into a plain black t-shirt and jeans. No security, no entourage. He made a pot of coffee, sat at his kitchen island, and opened his laptop. The headline hadn't hit the front page yet, but it was climbing. Woman thrown out of bank with billion-dollar check, caught on camera. The footage was blurry, shaky, phone-held, but the comments underneath were sharp as knives. Probably fake. She looks homeless, lol. Bet she forged that check. Banks have a right to protect themselves. Keanu scrolled through them in silence. Not a single person had asked for her name. Not a single person wondered if the bank had made a mistake. He closed the laptop. This wasn't just about Leah anymore. This was about every person who had ever been told they didn't look like they belonged. Every kid in a hoodie, every woman in worn heels, every immigrant, every outsider, every quiet professional dismissed before they even spoke. Keanu didn't want to trend. He wanted accountability, and he was going to deliver it in the most untraceable, unignorable way possible. That evening, Keanu sat in a quiet room lit only by a single standing lamp. The shadows moved slowly across the hardwood floor as the sun began to dip behind the hills. His laptop chimed softly. A new message from Alonzo had arrived. The subject line was simple. Branch 117, full profile, internal behavior history. The file was dense. Keanu scanned it quickly, then paused at a section flagged in red. 4 prior internal complaints for customer profiling, all dismissed. One involved a veteran in uniform trying to withdraw his own pension. Another involved a Muslim woman wearing a hijab. Keanu's jaw tightened. The name on all 4 incidents? Brian Holloway. Same teller, same arrogance, same pattern. Below that were brief notes from HR investigators, language like inconclusive, uncorroborated, and insufficient cause for disciplinary action. Keanu highlighted that portion and forwarded it to Mark Evanston. Within 2 minutes, Mark replied, "If we move fast, we can pull leverage from those complaints. No one wants exposure to a bias scandal during an election year, especially not Goldshire's chairman." Then came a second message from Mark, bolder than the first. "Want to buy the entire district instead?" Keanu stared at the screen. He didn't answer. Instead, he opened a document he'd written years ago but never used, an internal policy proposal titled Justice in Quiet Places. It was something he had drafted after witnessing another injustice. A young black student had been removed from a film event for not having the right pass, even though she had directed one of the films. No one apologized. She never came back the following year. That moment had stayed with him, and now, as he reread his own words, they echoed louder than ever. It is not enough to be silent in the face of injustice, but sometimes silence is the scalpel, not the sledgehammer. He saved the file. Then, for the first time that day, he smiled. Not the Hollywood smile, not the camera-ready grin, but something smaller, quieter. The kind of smile that comes when a man knows exactly what he's about to do. The next morning, Keanu arrived at a midtown office tower that housed Goldshire's legal headquarters. He wore the same jeans and black t-shirt from the night before, layered with a simple navy jacket. At reception, he gave his name. No entourage, no explanation, just, "They're expecting me." The receptionist blinked, glanced at her screen, and quickly nodded. "Yes, Mr. Reeves, executive floor. Conference room B." As he walked to the elevator, a senior executive caught a glimpse of him and froze mid-conversation. Whispers followed as the elevator doors closed behind him. Inside the boardroom, a team of Goldshire's lawyers waited. Keanu sat down at the head of the table, leaned forward, and placed a slim folder on the desk. Inside was everything: the complaints, the footage, the bias patterns, and the acquisition papers. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't threaten. He simply looked at each of them in the eye and said, "This isn't about headlines. This is about the culture you allowed to grow in your walls. Either you clean it up, or I will." And they believed him. Every single one of them. By mid-morning, Keanu was already several steps ahead. He sat at his home office desk, sunlight breaking softly through the wide windows, as he dialed Claire Nomura. She had been his legal advisor for over a decade, known in the legal world for her steel-trap mind and unwavering ethics. Claire wasn't the type to ask questions about why, just how soon and how deep. She picked up after 2 rings. "You need me?" "I do," Keanu said. "I need a full forensic scan of Goldshire Trust, legal history, settlements, past litigation. I want every discriminatory case that was sealed or buried." Claire didn't blink. "Got it. You want me to start with federal filings or go straight to internal whistleblower databases?" "Both." Claire let out a low breath. "We'll need a secure environment for that kind of pull." "I've got one." He texted her the address to a private server hosted by a digital rights nonprofit Keanu had helped fund under a different name. Clearline Project. It had end-to-end encryption, no government tracking, and a team of ghost ITs who erased all metadata once work was complete. Next, Keanu placed a call to Dr. Omar Kilpatrick. Omar was a financial strategist and former Wall Street analyst who'd walked away from the game at the peak of his career after a racial profiling incident during a billion-dollar pitch meeting. Keanu had reached out to him years ago after reading his anonymous blog post, and they had worked together ever since, quietly, discreetly, on projects that mattered. Omar answered with warmth. "Keanu, been a while. I need a deep dive," Keanu said. "Goldshire Trust, ownership layers, asset transfers, anything off-market, buried under holding companies." Omar chuckled softly. "That's a deep swamp. You want their rot or their roots?" "Both, but start with what's poisoning the ground." Omar's tone grew serious. "This personal?" "No, it's overdue." Omar agreed to begin immediately. He would cross-section shell companies through an AI-assisted mapping system he built himself, the kind of tool no institution wanted traced back to them. It would scan for fraud, nepotism, buried donations, suspicious patterns, all with plausible deniability. Once those calls were made, Keanu leaned back in his chair, opened another secure tab, and logged into the portal of a social justice foundation he had funded anonymously for 10 years. Project Echo. It was a grant-based nonprofit that helped people impacted by economic discrimination, particularly in housing, banking, and employment. Keanu had always kept his name off it. It wasn't for publicity. It was for truth. For stories the world overlooked. He sent a message to the lead coordinator, a woman named Raina Hart. "Raina, I need you to do a call-out for banking discrimination. Any institution, but especially Goldshire. Focus on rejected checks, refused service, aggressive conduct. I want testimonials, real people, verified." Within minutes, she responded with a single word: "On it." And just like that, the quiet investigation had begun. Not through press releases, not through headlines, but through action in the shadows. By noon, Raina had already posted the call for stories on Project Echo's encrypted forums. The wording was careful. No accusations, just an invitation. Have you ever been denied service at a bank for reasons that didn't make sense? Were you ever treated differently because of how you looked, what you wore, or how much money they thought you didn't have? We want to hear from you. The post spread faster than anyone anticipated. By early afternoon, Raina had 27 responses. By nightfall, there were over 130. Some were raw, some were articulate, many were heartbreaking. A teacher in Arizona who'd been denied a home loan because her name sounded foreign. A Latina grandmother in Chicago whose cashier's check for her daughter's surgery was refused because the teller didn't believe she had that kind of money. A Black entrepreneur in New York who opened a business account and later discovered it was flagged internally as high risk without any justification. And then came the patterns. Repeated mentions of Goldshire Trust. Not just from one city, from many. Different branches, different states, but the same story. Dismissive stares, Unexplained delays. Security called for no reason. Small humiliations, over and over, that added up to a wall. Reyna sent Keanu a secure zip file with the first 50 verified testimonies. Each was timestamped, reviewed, and signed with consent for anonymous use. Keanu didn't just skim them. He read each one, word for word. Some made him close his eyes for a moment. Others made him quietly furious. But the one that struck him hardest came from a teenager in Fresno. "My mom cried in the car for an hour after they told her she forged my dad's death benefits check. He died in Iraq." They didn't believe her. They called the police. I sat in the lobby and watched 2 officers make her prove she was his wife. She showed them his dog tags. One of them still laughed. Keanu highlighted that passage and sent it to Claire and Omar with a simple note. "Use this, wherever it fits best." Meanwhile, Claire had made progress on the legal front. She uncovered 3 prior discrimination suits against Goldshire Trust that had quietly disappeared, settled out of court under strict NDAs. The settlements were sealed, but metadata around the filing still existed, including dates, court jurisdictions, and law firms used. She traced them all back to the same internal counsel office at Goldshire. "Patterns of concealment," Claire told Keanu on a call. "They're not sloppy, but they're not invincible." Umar's findings added more weight. "Keanu," he said late that evening, "this is bigger than one branch. I've tracked charitable donations made by Goldshire's parent firm to political action committees, some of which funded voter suppression legislation last year." He paused. "I think you just found the crack in the dam." Keanu didn't respond right away. He stood by the window, phone pressed to his ear, watching the city lights flicker below. "Then, we don't fix just one branch," he said softly. "We start cutting at the roots." And he meant it. Not just for Leah, but for everyone who'd ever been told they didn't look the part. The next morning, Keanu met Claire and Omar at a private co-working space in West Hollywood. No labels, no logos, just frosted glass and quiet corridors. Claire arrived with a slim binder. Inside were case summaries of the sealed settlements, annotated with footnotes and jurisdiction flags. She laid them out like pieces on a chessboard. 3 lawsuits, all nearly identical, all quietly erased. Same firm each time. Same boilerplate language. Omar added his files to the table, a digital tablet with layered infographics, flowcharts, offshore entities, PAC donations, a maze of silent corruption. "I found shell companies recycling campaign funds through dummy nonprofits," Omar explained. "They look like youth scholarships, but the money never lands in real programs. Guess which bank moved the wire transfers?" Keanu nodded. "Goldshire." "Bingo," Omar said. Claire tapped a specific document. "They're protected by statute for now, but if a pattern of systemic discrimination is proven, especially if it crosses state lines, that's federal territory." DOJ level. Keanu folded his hands. "Then we make it undeniable." He opened his messenger bag and pulled out a small, leather-bound notebook. Inside, he had jotted down names, quotes, moments from the testimonials. No headlines, just people. "Let's build this the way it began," he said. "Quietly, patiently, from the ground up." Claire smiled just a little. Omar leaned back. "You're not just going after justice, you're going after culture." Keanu looked down at one particular name in the notebook. Leah Martinez. "She didn't just walk into a bank," he said. "She walked into the front line of something most people pretend doesn't exist." Outside, the sky was beginning to shift. Soft blue chased by gold, and inside that small, quiet room, the foundation of something irreversible had begun. The strategy wouldn't be public, not yet. But the wheels were turning, and when the truth finally came out, it wouldn't arrive with fury. It would arrive with facts and silence. The kind that clears a room, the kind that ends careers, the kind that, once heard, can never be unheard. Leah didn't say much when she got home. She stepped out of the rideshare quietly, nodded a soft thank you to the driver, and walked up the 2 flights of stairs to her apartment. The hallway smelled faintly of detergent and microwave soup from a neighbor's unit. The familiarity should have brought comfort. It didn't. Inside, she dropped her tote bag near the door and sat on the edge of her couch, still in her work clothes. Her palms were sweaty. Her ears were still ringing from the voices at the bank. Her chest tightened whenever she replayed it in her head. She hadn't cried at the bank. She hadn't cried in the coffee shop. But here, in the solitude of her living room, Leah finally let go. It wasn't just embarrassment. It was betrayal. She had walked into that bank, representing Keanu Reeves, carrying the trust of an entire nonprofit deal with every paper in perfect order. But to them, all they had seen was a woman with tired shoes and brown skin. She didn't check her phone. She didn't want to. She didn't want to see the texts from Mara asking how it went, or the missed call from Keanu's office, or the email marked urgent with the subject line, status of acquisition transfer, final verification needed. She needed to disappear for one night, just one. So she left her phone face down on the kitchen table, changed into sweatpants, and curled under a blanket on the couch. She stared at the ceiling in silence. But the world wasn't waiting. At 7:43 p.m., a video went live on TikTok, posted by a high school senior named Sadie Tran, who had been in line at the bank with her grandmother that morning. She'd recorded the entire thing. Not for drama, but because something had felt wrong. The video was 1 minute and 22 seconds long. It opened with Leah at the teller's window, holding out her ID and check. It cut to Brian Holloway's smug expression, shaking his head and glancing at a nearby guard. Then Leah's voice, measured, polite, "Please review the authorization. It's in the envelope," followed by Brian's dismissive tone. "Ma'am, this isn't real. Security's already on the way." At the end, as Leah is being escorted out, someone off-camo laughs. Another voice mutters, "Should address the part." Sadie's caption was simple. They kicked out a woman with an $800 0-cents M check because she wore Payless shoes. By 9 p.m., the video had over 600,000 views. By midnight, it had been reposted on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook, with captions ranging from outrage to disbelief. No one knew her name yet, but everyone was watching. At 6:15 the next morning, Leah's neighbor, Eva, knocked on her door. Eva was a retired librarian who occasionally brought over baked goods. Leah, still in her robe and slippers, opened the door slowly, eyes puffy from sleep, or maybe from what came before it. "You okay, hon?" Eva asked gently, holding out a plate of muffins. "I'm fine," Leah lied. "You might want to check your phone," Eva said, her voice softer than usual. "You're on it." Leah's stomach twisted. She took the plate, thanked her quietly, and closed the door. Then, against her better judgment, she picked up her phone from the kitchen table. 17 missed calls. 34 text messages. Her screen was flooded with notifications. A group chat with her college friends had exploded. One message stood out. "Leah, is this you?" Followed by a video link. She clicked it, and there it was. Her face, her voice, her humiliation, looping in millions of views for the internet to consume. Her hand trembled. Her name wasn't in the caption, but people had started tagging Keanu's assistant in the comments. Even before confirmation, strangers had begun to speculate, to dig. One comment read, "If that's who I think it is, someone's getting fired at that bank." Another, "This woman handled it with so much grace. Give her a damn raise." Then another, "She should sue. That's racial profiling, period." It was surreal. Leah sat down, scrolling through the mentions, the tweets, the duets of the video overlaid with commentary and outrage. A law student had broken down the potential civil rights violations. A former banker had stitched the video with his own story of being pressured to screen differently. The story was snowballing. She opened Instagram. Her inbox was flooded with interview requests. One came from a producer at Good Morning America, another from The View. Her email now contained a request from a reporter at the Washington Post. Subject line, "We are covering this injustice. Can you speak?" Leah wasn't sure what to feel. Fear? Pride? Panic? Nausea? She pulled her knees up to her chest on the couch. Her mind was racing. She hadn't said a word publicly, not to the media, not even to her own family. But the world had taken her silence and turned it into a banner of protest. She clicked on the video again. This time she watched not just herself, but the others in the room. The ones who looked away. The ones who laughed. The ones who didn't speak up. She wasn't ashamed anymore. She was angry, and beneath that anger something deeper was waking up. Something like purpose. By noon, the video had surpassed 12 million views. Leah's identity was confirmed, first in whispers on Reddit threads, then in a verified tweet from a journalist who'd covered one of Keanu's earlier humanitarian ventures. The tweet read, "That woman isn't just anyone, that's Leah Martinez, Keanu Reeves's executive assistant and deal negotiator. She was delivering a signed cashier's check on behalf of his nonprofit." It was followed by a screenshot of Leah's LinkedIn profile, now viewed thousands of times. The media reaction shifted from generic outrage to explosive curiosity. News anchors ran split-screen segments. On one side, the video of Leah's removal. On the other, clips of her from a panel discussion at a technology summit just 6 months prior. A journalist on a primetime show asked, "How does someone go from moderating a United Nations youth conference to being accused of fraud in a banking lobby?" Meanwhile, Keanu had still not made any public comment, not on social media, not through press agents, not through legal statements. The silence became a story of its own. Some speculated he was preparing for a lawsuit. Others imagined he'd orchestrated a sting operation from the beginning. But those who knew Keanu understood something different. He didn't speak until the words had weight. By that evening, the CEO of Goldshire Trust, Everett Weller, released a carefully worded statement. "We take accusations of discrimination very seriously and have launched an internal review regarding the events at our Beverly Ridge branch. We value our clients, and we are committed to integrity and inclusion." But the internet wasn't buying it. Underneath the bank's post, the top comment read, "You didn't value her until 12 million people were watching." A second, "Where's the apology to her? Or does your PR department not write those?" Third, "At Keanu Reeves, say the word and we close our accounts." Across social platforms, the hashtag #ShoesDon'tDefineUs began trending globally. People posted photos of their own worn shoes, alongside stories of being dismissed, ignored, or misjudged. A single moment had ignited a collective memory of a much deeper issue. And yet, in the center of that firestorm, Leah sat quietly in her apartment. She hadn't replied to any journalists. She hadn't posted a video response. She hadn't spoken to anyone outside of Keanu's team. But as the sun set, she opened her laptop and began typing. Not a press release, not a tweet, but a letter to herself. A declaration that this moment, however painful, would not be her legacy of humiliation. It would be her turning point. The sun had barely risen over the canyon ridges when Keanu sat down on the floor of his living room, barefoot, the light from his laptop flickering across his face. The house was quiet. Outside, wind rustled the olive trees. Inside, there was only the soft hum of the fan and the distant chirp of a mourning dove. He played the video again, not because he needed to, because he had to feel it one more time. Leah's voice, steady but small, the dismissive tone of the teller. The moment the security guards appeared, as if she had threatened someone with violence instead of holding a check that could buy the building they were standing in, Keanu closed his eyes. He didn't see the bank. He saw his mother. She was 28 again, tugging at the sleeves of a faded cardigan, standing in line at a restaurant in Toronto. They'd saved for weeks to eat there, just her and her 2 boys. But the hostess took one look at her shoes and suggested politely, "This is a members-only event tonight, miss." There was no event. Just discomfort. Just judgment. They walked home in the cold, silent. He remembered that silence, the same kind Leah walked through now. He opened his notebook, the same one he'd used for writing scripts, for sketching characters who lived in the corners of pain. But this wasn't for a movie. This was a blueprint. He didn't call his publicist. He didn't call the press. He didn't draft a statement. He started with a circle. Inside it, the word power. Then he drew lines outward. Ownership, legal leverage, board voting, public trust, funder networks, and at the farthest point, a small note: change what people think banks are for. He got up, brewed coffee, and walked out to the balcony with the notebook in one hand. He didn't feel anger the way most people did. His was quiet, precise, a surgical flame. He thought of Leah's work over the years, of the late nights she spent reorganizing charitable grants, the nights she stayed at the office so he could rest before international flights, the mornings she greeted his mother with flowers on her birthday without ever being asked. He remembered once finding her asleep in the conference room, her coat over her shoulders like a blanket, a spreadsheet still glowing on her laptop. She had never asked for recognition. Now the world had humiliated her in front of strangers, and worse, had done it so casually. Keanu took a sip of coffee and opened his laptop again. There would be no press conference, no social media storm, just a silent response, but one loud enough to echo in every boardroom across the country. At 6:40 a.m., Keanu sent 2 emails. The first went to Claire Nomura. Subject: ready. She had been expecting it. The second went to Dr. Omar Kilpatrick. Subject: begin phase 2. Neither message contained more than a few words. They didn't need to. Claire and Omar were part of the circle. People who understood that real power didn't posture. It moved silently until it moved everything. Claire replied immediately. Understood. Drafting terms for shadow acquisition, reconfirming silent partner agreement with Emerald Capital. Omar followed minutes later. Goldshire Trust's holding company is fractured. Ownership sits on a knife's edge. We can push with one leveraged move. Keanu stared at the screen. He didn't type again. He just nodded to himself. This wasn't revenge, it was correction. Correction for every working-class woman who had been told her shoes made her untrustworthy. Correction for every mother who had been told her worth was measured in how expensive her purse looked. Correction for every assistant, aide, or administrator who kept a machine running without ever being seen. At 7:12 IMing, Keanu called Lydia Harper. She answered groggily from London. He apologized for the hour, then explained everything in calm, even sentences. Lydia was the managing partner of Mero Strategic Holdings, an investment fund with quiet influence in several global banks, including Goldshire Trust's parent company. Keanu had once funded their social entrepreneurship arm under a false name. She owed him. And more importantly, she believed in him. When he finished, there was a long silence. Then Lydia said, "You want the branch?" Keanu replied, "No, I want the disease, the root of it," she sighed. "That's going to take more than a wire transfer," Keanu said. "I have something better." "What?" He answered without hesitation. "Public faith." Lydia paused, then said quietly, "I'll make the call." By 8:30, Keanu's kitchen table was covered in printed sheets, contracts, and diagrams. Omar's digital models of how equity would shift if one major investor flipped. Claire's annotated breakdowns of regulatory limitations in California's banking laws. And a red folder marked testimonies sent by the social justice team Keanu had quietly funded for years. Inside that folder were stories. A black father turned away from a mortgage discussion because his jeans were frayed. A Latino teenager denied an account because his home address was listed as a shelter. A woman refused a business loan after disclosing she had survived domestic abuse. Page after page, and not one of those people had gone viral. Keanu laid the folder at the center of the table. That was the center of the storm. Not Leah, not even him. The people who didn't have $842 million, 0 cents. The people who had nothing, and still deserved better. That evening, Keanu sat alone in his study as twilight painted long shadows on the floor. He didn't turn on the lights. He didn't need to. The glow from the city outside, soft and diffused through the windows, was enough. In his hands he held a single sheet of paper, not legal paperwork, not an email. It was a handwritten note from Leah. He had found it once, tucked between reports on an international grant program. It wasn't addressed to him. It was to herself. A reminder. I'm not invisible. My worth isn't measured by how they look at me. It's in how I show up anyway. Keanu read it slowly, again and again. Then he folded it. He opened a drawer and placed it beside an old photo of his mother, young, determined, wearing a thrifted dress and holding a second-hand clutch bag like it was armor. She had fought for every room she was allowed into, never asked for favors, never let humiliation define her. He closed the drawer. Then he made one final call, not to a lawyer, not to an investor. He called Leah. When she answered, her voice was still raw. She apologized again for causing trouble, for being seen, for becoming a problem he hadn't asked for. Keanu stopped her gently. You didn't cause anything, he said. You revealed it. She didn't speak. So he continued. I need you back at the office tomorrow. I don't know if I can, she whispered. You can, and you will, because what happens next, you're going to help me build it. He didn't explain further. He didn't need to. Leah breathed in slowly. Okay. Keanu ended the call and sat in the silence again. Not angry, not plotting, just focused. This wasn't about punishing a bank teller. It wasn't even about punishing the institution. It was about rebalancing something that had tilted for too long. A culture that judged character by clothes, that saw humility as weakness, that taught men in suits to laugh at the woman holding the briefcase. He would correct it. And no one would see it coming. Not with tweets, not with interviews, with something stronger. Ownership. On the corner of his notepad, he scribbled one final phrase. The loudest voice isn't always the one shouting. He underlined it once, then he closed the notebook. The room returned to stillness. Somewhere across the city, the lights of Goldshire Trust's flagship branch blinked in corporate indifference. But under those lights, the foundation had already begun to shift. They just didn't know it yet. And when they finally did, it wouldn't be with a bang. It would be with the unmistakable weight of justice. Arriving without warning, without spectacle. Just purpose. And the unshakable silence of a man who had decided enough was enough. Claire Nomura had always been surgical when it came to corporate architecture. But what she uncovered over the next 48 hours made her pause, not from confusion, but from disbelief at how brittle the giant had become. Goldshire Trust wasn't just vulnerable, it was hollow. The bank's public image, polished marble lobbies, gold-lettered logos, and tailored executives masked a quietly rotting core. Their real estate holdings were over-leveraged. Several of their equity partners were in arbitration over payout discrepancies, and their community reinvestment quota hadn't been met in over 3 years, which meant federal pressure was mounting behind the scenes. But the most damning detail? Leadership had stopped listening. At the top of the organizational chart sat Gerald Blackstone, CEO and chairman of the board, a man known more for photo apps than policy. In every annual letter to shareholders, he used the same phrases: our trusted legacy, time-honored values, proven systems. Claire had reviewed the video of Leah's incident at least a dozen times. Not for the outrage, it was clear, but for what it revealed about the institution's culture. Brian Holloway, the teller, hadn't just acted with bias, He had acted with confidence that no one above him would object. That kind of certainty only comes from rot that starts at the top. Keanu stood by the window in Claire's office as she laid the files across the table. "This is your leverage," she said. "They've protected their image, but not their infrastructure. No real succession planning, no internal watchdogs with bite. You push here," she tapped a single holding company in red, "and the whole thing shifts." Keanu nodded slowly. "Can we do it quietly?" Claire smiled. "It's already begun." Across town, Dr. Omar Kilpatrick had already executed Phase 2. Emerald Capital, acting through a third-party equity shield, had acquired a strategic block of shares in Goldshirt's holding group. Not enough to ring alarm bells, but enough to trigger proxy influence if pushed during a vote. Keanu had two conditions: discretion and values. This wouldn't be a power grab for headlines. It would be a controlled insertion of ethics into an institution that had forgotten its purpose. Claire suggested a surgical approach. Rather than purchasing the entire bank or making a dramatic hostile bid, Keanu would target the specific division that oversaw regional operations, including the branch where Leah had been turned away. It was a symbolic node with practical control. If they took it, they could set new hiring policies, revise training programs, and alter client engagement standards across hundreds of locations. Starting with one. Keanu wasn't interested in revenge. He was building a model, a demonstration. That real change doesn't come from yelling the loudest. It comes from owning the room. Claire slid a memo across the table. "Gerald Blackstone still thinks this is an isolated PR issue. He doesn't know we're already inside." Keanu read the memo, then looked up. "Let's move." By the end of the week, Claire's office had become the nerve center of a quiet revolution. Diagrams filled the whiteboards. Colored pins marked relationships between subsidiaries, real estate arms, and consulting firms tied to Goldshire's regional operations. But Keanu didn't show up with an entourage or cameras. He arrived each morning with a notebook and a thermos of black coffee. No interviews. No noise. He asked questions that no investor typically asked. How many community grants have they issued in the past year? Do they have policies for second-chance banking clients? Where do their internship programs pull from? Private colleges only? Claire, efficient as always, had the answers. Each one a confirmation of systemic indifference. Goldshire had made billions off the image of responsibility but hadn't walked the walk in decades. And that's where the leverage lay. Through Emerald Capital's proxy, Keanu began assembling a slate of reform-minded stakeholders, diverse professionals from finance, education, and community development sectors. It wasn't about tokenism. It was infrastructure change. Meanwhile, Omar reached out to low-profile but influential board members who had long been frustrated with Blackstone's leadership. He didn't mention Keanu by name. He didn't have to. The numbers spoke louder than any press release. Goldshire's stagnant growth, their waning public trust, the social media backlash, still trending under hashtags like bank bias and check the check. All of it had created pressure, and Keanu wasn't interested in fighting it. He was shaping it. Leah returned to work quietly, just as Keanu had asked. There were no announcements, no prepared statements, just the usual rhythm of spreadsheets, calls, and reports. But something had shifted. People treated her with a new kind of respect, not performative, not forced. It was as if they knew something was coming. Even within Goldshire's halls, subtle tremors began. Internal memos circulated about cultural sensitivity updates. Branch managers were suddenly encouraged to review frontline protocol. There were whispers that a review board was being formed, all without a single word from Keanu to the press. Claire watched it all unfold with a mix of awe and quiet satisfaction. She had advised tech giants and governments, but never seen a maneuver so clean. No lawsuits, no walkouts, no threats. Just ownership. Keanu never used the term takeover. He didn't need to. What they were doing wasn't a stunt. It was a shift in soul. And at the center of it, not a man in a suit shouting down from a podium, but one who walked silently through halls of power, making sure the right people had a seat at the table. By the time Goldshear's board scheduled an emergency session to address stakeholder restructuring, the narrative was no longer in their control. It was Keanu's. The emergency session was scheduled on a Friday morning. Board members arrived expecting a defensive scramble. Most had prepared talking points about damage control, optics management, and shallow reforms to placate public outrage. What they didn't expect was Keanu Reeves. He didn't enter dramatically. He was already seated at the far end of the table, reviewing financials with Omar and Claire. His presence sent a jolt through the room. Some recognized him immediately, others hesitated, unsure what he was doing there, until they saw the binder in front of him. It was stamped with legal authority. Emerald Capital. Shareholder proxy. Majority regional influence. Gerald Blackstone's face tightened. He tried to assert control. "Mr. Reeves, I'm not sure what you believe you're entitled to here." Keanu didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He opened the binder to page 3. A portfolio of compliance failures, ethical violations, and missed community investment thresholds, all legal, all current, all documented. He didn't gloat. He pointed. "This is where the system failed," he said, "and this is where we begin again." There was no applause, just silence. Respectful, necessary silence. Claire laid out the new structure, a 3-year reform plan. Rotational leadership sourced from community finance experts, transparent reporting of client treatment incidents, a new code of conduct co-authored by social justice advocates. Gerald stood frozen, grasping for control, but the board didn't back him. The numbers were too clear, the risks too great. The future had already arrived, and it was sitting quietly at the far end of the table. Within 24 hours, Gerald Blackstone resigned. No fanfare, no defiance. Just a carefully worded email and a quiet exit out the side door of his own institution. News outlets picked up the story quickly, trying to spin it as a corporate shakeup or celebrity revenge. But Keanu never issued a press statement. He didn't hold a press conference. Instead, he held a staff meeting at the same branch where Leah had been humiliated. He walked in through the front door, just as she had. But this time, he wasn't escorted out. He was welcomed in. He stood in the lobby and addressed the full team, tellers, assistants, branch managers. "I'm not here to punish anyone," he said. "I'm here to build something better, not just for Leah, for all of us." There were no fancy speeches, no righteous monologues, just a call for decency, for awareness, for systems that reflect the people they claim to serve. One by one, employees nodded, not out of fear, but because they felt the shift too, something deeper than power, something more lasting than performance. After the meeting, Keanu walked past the teller windows and paused. He glanced briefly at the spot where Leah had once stood. Then he looked forward, not for headlines, but for healing. The clip had started with muffled audio and shaky camera work, just 38 seconds of grainy footage. Leah, standing at the counter, her posture tense, the check visible in her trembling hand. Brian Holloway's voice came through clearly near the end. "Lady, if you're going to play rich, at least wear better shoes." Then came the laugh. Sharp, mean. That laugh became the fuse. By morning, the video had been reposted over 1 million times. Within hours, it crossed 6 million views. By the end of the week, it was the #1 trending clip in North America. The caption under it, "They kicked out a woman with an $842.00 check because she wore Payless shoes," morphed into something more potent. Banking while plain A hashtag that cut deep because it was real. 2 real stories flooded in, from nurses denied loans because they didn't look responsible, from immigrants turned away for having too many documents, from young professionals asked to return with someone older to co-sign. The comments sections weren't just filled with outrage. They were filled with lived experiences. Women, men, working-class families, veterans, single mothers, teachers, all of them describing the subtle humiliations, the under-the-breath dismissals, the slow erosion of dignity in lobbies and teller lines. Leah's story had been the spark, but the fire had always been there, smoldering beneath the surface of respectability politics and outdated prejudice. At Goldshire Trust's main headquarters, the communications team worked around the clock, trying to manage the fallout. Their first statement, a generic paragraph about reviewing internal procedures, was so tone-deaf it became a meme. Someone overlaid it onto a photo of a luxury lobby and captioned it, "Come for the coffee, stay for the classism." The second statement, issued after Keanu's silent restructuring, was a little better. It acknowledged the incident, mentioned training reforms, and promised accountability. But by then, it was too late. A senator from California, Imelda Garay, stepped into the fray. During a press conference outside the Capitol, she held up a still image of Leah in the lobby, her body half-turned, security already approaching her. "This isn't just bad policy," Garay said. "This is a systemic rot." She called for a federal investigation into discriminatory banking practices. The crowd behind her held signs that read, "We belong in every lobby. Silence isn't fraud. Where's my dignity check?" By day 5, 3 other banks had been implicated through similar viral stories. Customers began pulling funds. Influencers posted side-by-side images, luxury clients in suits being pampered versus working-class individuals being ignored. And outside the very branch Leah had walked into just a week prior, a group of peaceful protesters set up a small encampment. They weren't angry, they were patient. Determined, some held handwritten signs. Others just stood silently, embodying the same quiet grace Leah had shown in that video, grace that had been mistaken for weakness. But no one was laughing anymore, not even Brian Holloway. Because while the internet was unpredictable, one thing was certain now: it wasn't going away. Inside the same Goldshire Trust branch, everything felt different. Employees who once moved with quiet certainty now exchanged glances filled with unease. Even those uninvolved with Leah's humiliation carried a shared discomfort, knowing they'd been part of something that had looked the other way too many times. They weren't villains, but they had watched and said nothing. Brian Holloway had been suspended pending investigation, but his name had already become shorthand across social media for condescension in a suit. Local newspapers began publishing follow-up stories, not about Keanu, but about Leah, about who she was before the video, how she had quietly risen through the ranks in corporate law, mentored young women in underfunded law schools, and worked pro bono cases on weekends without ever seeking credit. Her past wasn't glamorous, it was anchored in grit. Une reporter tracked down a former client, an elderly immigrant named Rosa Delgado. She had no idea what had happened online, but when asked about Leah, her eyes lit up. "She saved my home. She didn't care how I looked. She only cared if I understood the paperwork." That quote went viral next. Then came the think pieces. What does wealth look like? Why respect still depends on appearance. The price of dressing down in America. Academics began joining panels. Economists weighed in on unconscious bias and transactional bias theory. Entire morning segments were dedicated to discussing how banking interiors reinforced social hierarchies, right down to the flooring materials and seating arrangements. But amid all the noise, Leah remained silent. She didn't post, she didn't appear on talk shows, she didn't respond to brand offers. Instead, she returned to her quiet apartment and did what she always did. She worked. Keanu noticed. He never asked her to speak. He didn't need to. He knew the weight of being turned into a symbol. It could flatten the soul if you weren't ready for it. So he shielded her, not with statements, but with action. He sent Claire and Omar to ensure Leah had every legal resource and every financial protection she might need. He reviewed hate mail before Leah could even see it. He had her name removed from certain public filings where possible. And when a high-profile podcast invited them both to talk about the incident, Keanu declined, not with anger, just with 3 words. Her work speaks. That decision went viral too, not because it was loud, but because it was rare. It reminded people of something they hadn't seen in a long time: respect without agenda. As the noise escalated and networks scrambled to book experts, Keanu kept working behind the scenes. He wasn't trying to control the narrative, he was building a new one. Quietly, deliberately, unpolished at a time, at Goldsher's newly acquired flagship branch, a mural began to take shape along one interior wall. It wasn't commissioned by Keanu, it was started by one of the tellers, a young woman named Vanessa, who'd once remained silent during Leah's ordeal. She came in early and stayed late, using watercolor pencils to outline the first strokes. The image was simple: a woman standing in line at a bank, her shoes untied, her head slightly bowed, but above her was a swirl of abstract light, and behind the counter, instead of a teller, a mirror. The caption written beneath it read, "See the person, not the price tag." Customers began taking photos. One brought flowers. Another slipped a thank you card addressed to whoever had the courage to let this happen. By the end of the week, 4 other branches requested copies. Then came something no one expected: an open letter signed by 30 former Goldsher employees who had either left or been let go over the past decade. The letter detailed recurring patterns of discrimination, dress code policing, and denial of service that echoed Leah's experience. It ended with a single line: "We were all Leah once." But she spoke the loudest by saying nothing. The letter trended globally, not just because of the story, because of what people began to recognize in their own lives. Students who were mocked for wearing thrift store suits to scholarship interviews. Mothers who were ignored in banks unless they brought their husbands. Veterans in wheelchairs who were asked to wait outside while documents were processed. The story had stopped being about a bank, it had become a mirror. And mirrors, when held too long, begin to show more than we expect. Meanwhile, Keanu continued working with Claire and Omar on implementing new training protocols. Not corporate workshops with buzzwords and slide decks, but immersive programs led by real people with lived experiences. Rosa Delgado, the woman Leah had once helped, was invited to speak at the first orientation. She didn't use a microphone. She didn't need to. She told her story in plain words, and when she was done, the room didn't applaud. They stood in silence, moved, changed. Outside the building, a small crowd had gathered, not for protest, but out of quiet gratitude. Some held hand-drawn signs, others simply came to look, to be near the place where something different had happened. And inside, sitting in the back row, Leah finally smiled. Not because the world had changed, but because it had begun to listen. And for the first time in a long time, she felt seen. Not as a victim, not as a trend, but as a whole person. Keanu, watching from a quiet corner, didn't approach her. He just nodded once, then turned back to his notes. The work wasn't done, but the world had taken its first real breath. The morning sun slanted through the beveled windows of Goldshire Trust's executive floor, catching the edge of Gerald Blackstone's polished desk. It was supposed to be just another Tuesday: meetings with legal, a luncheon with the Board of Regents, and a mid-afternoon golf fitting. But something was different the moment his assistant walked in. She held a cream-colored envelope in both hands. No logo, no callhead, just a single embossed seal. "K. Courier dropped this off," she said. "Said it was urgent." Gerald waved her off distractedly and continued reviewing quarterly reports. But curiosity got the better of him. He slit the top of the envelope cleanly with his letter opener. Inside was a 2-page letter, tipped, precise, quiet in tone, but surgical in intent. It began with a simple header: "Proposal for acquisition. Goldshire Trust, 5th Avenue branch, from KR Ventures, LLC. 2. Gerald Blackstone, CEO. Gerald furrowed his brow and kept reading. The letter didn't open with threats. It opened with data. A breakdown of transaction denials compared to client income tiers, charts showing a 38% disparity in service wait times between clients wearing branded fashion and those in discount apparel. Embedded footnotes citing complaints lodged with state regulators over the last 7 years, none of which had made it to the public record, but somehow Keanu had them. The next section referenced a class action lawsuit quietly dismissed in 2019 that involved racial profiling tied to mortgage lending, followed by a comparison of management diversity statistics that placed Goldshire Trust below the industry average by 47%. All of it delivered in the same calm tone, no accusation, just illumination. And then, in the final paragraph, came the offer. Keanu was offering to purchase the Fifth Avenue branch for 40% above its last appraised market value. No negotiation, no contingencies. Terms were clean. But, along with the offer, was a statement that twisted like a blade wrapped in silk. This is not a rebuke. This is an opportunity to divest from a structure that no longer reflects the values of a forward-facing financial institution. I believe in reinvention. I also believe in accountability. Gerald stood up. The room felt suddenly smaller. He walked to the glass wall that overlooked the city and stared out, trying to slow his thoughts. The Fifth Avenue branch had been one of their most historic acquisitions, not because it was profitable, it rarely was, but because it was symbolic. Old money, legacy banking, wood-paneled ceilings and hand-carved teller counters. It was tradition, and now that tradition had been used against him. He didn't need to check social media. He already knew the headlines. He'd seen the video. He'd heard the girl crying as she was escorted out. But he hadn't acted. He'd waited, like so many times before, for the noise to fade. Only this time, it hadn't. And now, Keanu Reeves, a man most known for silence, had just fired the loudest shot of all, without ever raising his voice. Gerald folded the letter carefully, almost reverently, and returned it to the envelope. He placed it on his desk and sat back in his chair, fingers tented beneath his chin. The room was so quiet he could hear the faint whir of the air conditioner, but his thoughts were far louder. He pulled up the internal report from the Fifth Avenue branch. The most recent numbers weren't impressive. Declining deposits, minimal new account growth, and a dismal community outreach score. But until now, it had always been protected, untouchable, a symbol of the bank's old-world prestige. Gerald had built his reputation on protecting that image, upholding standards, filtering who belonged. The truth was, he had never considered people like Leah Martinez to be part of that equation. Not because he hated them, but because he never thought about them at all. And that, he now realized, was exactly the problem. He picked up his phone and dialed a private extension. "Connect me with the board chair," he said quietly. "We need to discuss an asset transfer, today." Meanwhile, across town, Claire Nomura and Dr. Omar Kilpatrick were already reviewing Keanu's contingency documents. The deal was designed to close within 48 hours of board approval, leveraging a shadow LLC Keanu had quietly established years earlier for ethical acquisitions and community banking initiatives. Everything was prepared, down to the final signature line. At Keanu's home in Laurel Canyon, a thick envelope sat untouched on the dining table. He hadn't checked for a response yet. He didn't need to. He already knew how this part would go. Instead, he stood at the back patio, sipping black coffee, watching the clouds stretch low and slow over the hills. The city was waking up beneath him, but his world remained still, calm, unshaken. This wasn't about vengeance. It wasn't about making headlines. It was about a system that had bent too long in the wrong direction. One small, precise correction. That's all it would take to shift the axis. Back at Goldshire's headquarters, Gerald met with the board behind closed doors. His legal counsel advised him not to engage, that accepting the offer would be an admission of fault, that it could hurt the brand, but Gerald wasn't listening to them anymore. He looked at the board, men and women in suits who had benefited from decades of silent exclusion, and said simply, "We've been outplayed. But this isn't about us. This is about the future." The room fell quiet. By noon, the board voted unanimously to accept the sale. No press releases, no public statements, just a quiet transfer of ownership. The building that once denied Leah entry now belonged, in full, to the man who believed in her most. And Keanu never said a word about it. He didn't tweet, he didn't gloat, he didn't give interviews. But 3 days later, a simple placard appeared beside the Fifth Avenue branch's new glass doors. Reeves Financial Cooperative, where every voice counts, and beneath it in smaller letters, built on trust, not appearances. The morning sun filtered gently through the blinds of Leah's modest apartment in Los Feliz. A half-drunk cup of tea sat forgotten on the kitchen table, next to a stack of unopened mail and a frayed folder she hadn't touched in years. She hadn't slept much. The whirlwind of the last few days, the humiliation, the viral video, Keanu's silence, the sudden transfer of an entire bank branch, still left her breathless. She hadn't asked Keanu for explanations. She didn't need to. His silence had said everything. Still, she needed something to center her, something that didn't involve headlines or corporate chaos or social media outrage. Leah reached for the folder, an old envelope her grandmother had given her before she passed. It was labeled Johannesburg, 1992. Inside were yellowed photographs, handwritten letters, and a folded flyer from a local community workshop. She shuffled through the contents slowly, like she was touching old skin. Yoon photograph stopped her cold. It was a simple shot, grainy, slightly off-center. Her grandmother, Inez Martinez, standing proudly in front of a modest office building in Johannesburg. Above the glass door was a sun-faded sign that read, Alvarez Accounting Services, empowering communities since 1978. Leah stared at it, her breath catching. She'd heard stories about that place. Her grandmother used to talk about working in South Africa during the final years of apartheid, how she helped set up bookkeeping systems for Black-owned businesses that were systematically denied access to loans and financial literacy. She had built budgets for fruit sellers, bakers, seamstresses. That office had been a hub of empowerment. But what tugged at Leah now wasn't just nostalgia. It was the name, Alvarez. That name had come up only once before in her professional life, when she'd first interviewed with Keanu Reeves. He'd mentioned that his mother, Patricia Taylor, had worked briefly at a consulting firm in Johannesburg. He hadn't said the name of the office, but he did mention a woman named Inez, someone who taught her grace under pressure. Leah's heart thudded. She pulled out the photo and scanned it again, this time focusing not on her grandmother, but on the background. There it was, in the far right corner of the glass, barely visible, a small placard listing the building's suite tenants. Suite 3B, Patricia Taylor, Costume Design Services. Shaz dropped the photograph onto the table, stunned. For a few long seconds, the apartment fell into silence, save for the distant hum of traffic on Sunset Boulevard. Her mind reeled, not just from the coincidence, but from what it implied. Decades earlier, in a city far from here, two women, her grandmother and Keanu's mother, had worked under the same roof, shared the same coffee machine, navigated the same uncertain streets, and now, all these years later, their paths had crossed again, through Leah and Keanu. It wasn't just business, it never had been. Something deeper had been moving beneath the surface this whole time, a thread woven long before either of them knew what it meant to be dismissed, doubted, or overlooked. Leah sat back slowly and closed her eyes. And for the first time since the incident at the bank, she smiled. Across town, Keanu sat alone on a worn leather bench outside the new Reeves Financial Cooperative. He had arrived early, well before opening hours. The morning breeze was cool, the sidewalk still quiet. The building behind him looked ordinary on the outside, but inside, it was undergoing a silent revolution. It wasn't just about policies. It was about people. He held a small, folded photograph in his hand, the same one Leia had discovered. She had scanned it and sent it to him late the night before with no message, no explanation. She didn't need to say anything. The image spoke louder than words ever could. Keanu had stared at it for hours. The black and white edges, the cracked gloss. Patricia, his mother, listed in small print beside Inez Martinez. He remembered that name. His mother used to mention her from time to time, a fierce woman with a fiery heart who wore mismatched earrings and made strong ginger tea, a woman who taught her not just how to balance books, but how to navigate life when no one believed you belonged in the room. That quiet resilience, that grit, that fire. Now he saw it again, in Leah, the way she had swallowed the embarrassment at the bank and kept moving. The way she had stood in the shadows all these years, building behind the scenes, never asking for credit. Just like Inez. Just like Patricia. A slow, full breath filled Keanu's chest. He felt something click into place. A knowing. A return. At exactly 8:00 IMM, the doors of the branch unlocked. The staff, newly hired, hand-selected by Leia and Claire, welcomed the first wave of customers. Most of them weren't wealthy. Some didn't have perfect credit, but they were greeted by name, offered coffee, and treated like they mattered. That was the change. Keanu stood and walked through the lobby without drawing attention to himself. The layout was different now. Softer colors, community bulletin boards, open desk stations, no marble dividers, no cold stares. He saw a little boy clutching his mother's hand while she nervously filled out a small business loan application. The teller leaned forward, smiling gently, speaking to her in Spanish. This was what justice looked like. Not loud, not televised. Quiet, Rio. Just before leaving, Keanu stopped by the main office. Leah was seated behind a sleek, minimal desk, reviewing a binder filled with financial outreach proposals. She looked up when he entered, but didn't say anything at first. Keanu placed the old photograph on her desk. Inez and Patricia, he said simply. Leah nodded, her eyes already welling. She taught my mom to stand tall, he added. I think your grandmother passed that same fire down. Leah tried to laugh, but the emotion caught her off guard. I guess this was meant to be, she whispered. Keanu smiled softly. Some connections take time, but they always find their way. Then he placed one more item on the desk. A handwritten note. Legacy isn't what we build, it's who we empower. Welcome to the new future. And with that, he turned and walked out, back into the sunlit street, leaving behind a building filled not with transactions, but with transformation. The boardroom at Goldshire Trust's downtown headquarters was quieter than usual. No catered breakfast, no executive banter. Just tension, thick enough to silence even the most arrogant voice. Gerald Blackstone sat at the head of the long walnut table, jaw clenched, eyes darting between the proposal packet in front of him and the 6 board members who had shown up early. Each man and woman had a copy of the same document, the offer from Keanu Reeves, 40% above market value. Immediate funds wired upon acceptance, a legally binding clause that required public acknowledgement of past policy failures, disguised as a commitment to future community values. But it wasn't just money on the table. It was reputation. Gerald had spent decades building the illusion of Goldshire Trust as a pillar of traditional banking, solid, unyielding, predictable. But after the viral video, after the shareholders began calling, after the reporters circled like vultures, he knew the tide had turned. And Keanu hadn't even spoken publicly, not once. That silence had made it worse. Because when someone like Keanu stays quiet, people start listening harder. Gerald cleared his throat and looked down the table. "Let's put it to a vote," he said. One by one, the hands went up. 6 in favor, 1 abstained. It was done. The Fifth Avenue branch, where Leah Martinez had been humiliated, where the viral video had been born, was officially under new ownership. By noon that day, Keanu's legal team had finalized every form. Wire transfers cleared, licensing submitted, the bank's digital system updated. A new nameplate was already being designed, but Keanu wasn't at the building. He didn't need to be. Instead, he sent a single, calmly worded email to every branch manager within the Goldshire Trust Network. Subject: Mandatory Staff Ethics Summit. Attendance required. Body: In light of recent events, a mandatory Ethics and Dignity in Service Summit will take place this Friday for all Goldshire employees, including senior management. This is not optional. The session will include first-hand testimonials, inclusive service training, and values clarification. Transportation and compensation will be covered. No staff will be terminated prior to this session. However, the culture of impunity will end here. KR. That was it. No press conference, no grand video, no quote for headlines, just the kind of message that made inboxes across the company go cold. Some employees began texting each other immediately. Others panicked, wondering if their past actions had been reviewed. At least 2 mid-level managers in the regional HR department submitted their resignations that afternoon, citing pending PR concerns. At the Fifth Avenue branch itself, the transformation had already begun. Leah, now serving as Director of Community Equity, walked through the corridors with quiet authority. The walls had been repainted, the leather chairs replaced with sturdy seating more accessible to elderly and disabled clients. A fresh coffee corner had been added, not as a gimmick, but as a symbol of welcome. The front desk no longer required a dress code to be served. One intern joked, "It feels more like a library now, a good library, where people help you, not judge you." No one laughed, they just nodded. By Friday morning, the auditorium Keanu had reserved for the Ethics Summit was nearly full, not just with employees from the Fifth Avenue branch, but from every Goldshire Trust location within a 100-mile radius. From tellers and assistants to district supervisors, they came in pressed suits and nervous expressions. On stage stood Claire Nomura, her voice calm and deliberate as she welcomed them. Behind her, projected on the wall, was a single phrase: "Dignity is not negotiable." There were no slick PowerPoint presentations, no corporate jargon, just real people with real stories. A woman from South LL spoke of how she was denied a loan despite perfect credit. An immigrant father shared how his small business account was inexplicably closed after he switched from his native tongue to English with an accent. An elderly veteran recalled being told to try a credit union next time when he didn't wear a tie. And then Leah stepped up. She wore the same pair of Payless shoes she'd worn that day in the bank. No irony, no performance, just truth. She recounted everything, not with rage or bitterness, but clarity. "When I walked into that branch, I wasn't just carrying a check," she said. "I was carrying trust, not just mine, but Keanu's, and it was torn apart by one man's assumptions. That doesn't hurt me. It hurts everyone we were about to serve." There was silence in the room. Not defensive silence. Reflective. Several employees lowered their eyes. One woman in compliance wiped away a tear. Claire returned to the mic. "You're not here to be punished," she said. "You're here to begin again. This company is no longer built on performance metrics. It's built on values. If you can't work from that place, this is your moment to leave." No one stood up. Instead, heads nodded slowly. Some whispered apologies to colleagues they had ignored. Others took notes they didn't need to. Back at the Fifth Avenue branch, the door now opened not to marble arrogance, but quiet empathy. A wheelchair ramp had been installed overnight. The security guard at the door, Once quick to scan clothing, Nu offered warm greetings and umbrellas on rainy days, Keanu hadn't fired a single soul. He had replaced something more powerful, the operating system of the culture itself. Reporters flooded inboxes asking for statements, television anchors speculated on his motives, but Keanu stayed silent. He didn't grant interviews, he didn't show up for a victory photo. He didn't even post about it. He let Leah and Claire do the speaking, let the summit do the shifting. Let the bank become what it should have been all along. And by the end of that week, a new plaque was mounted on the inside of the lobby entrance. It read, "No assumption belongs between a person and their dignity." Small print at the bottom added, "Property of Reeves Equity Collective." The following Monday morning, the entire company was summoned to a mandatory all-hands video call. Branches across the country logged in. Tellers in break rooms, managers in conference offices, even home-based analysts adjusted their screens. Most of them didn't know what to expect. Some assumed it would be another corporate lecture, wrapped in soft promises and HR scripts. Then Keanu appeared. He wasn't in a boardroom or luxury suite. He sat in a modest, sunlit room with bare walls and a single potted plant behind him. No backdrop, no branding. Just Keanu in a dark blue t-shirt, reading glasses folded beside his laptop, and a quiet intensity that filled the screen without trying. "Good morning," he began, his voice calm. He didn't start with small talk. He didn't joke to ease the tension. He told a story. "A few weeks ago, someone I trust with my reputation, with my life's work, walked into one of your branches carrying the final piece of a deal that would have changed thousands of lives. Her name is Leah Martinez. You've probably heard that name by now, but what you haven't heard is what it cost her that day." Screens across the country went still. She was dismissed because of her clothes. Mocked because she didn't fit someone's idea of wealth. Accused, publicly humiliated and removed by security, all while holding proof of a transaction worth more than the yearly budget of some nations? He paused, giving the wait room to settle. That isn't just a failure of one man's judgment. It's a mirror held up to the culture that allowed it. Some employees shifted uncomfortably in their chairs. Keanu looked into the lens, his expression steady. "I've never believed in shaming people, but I do believe in accountability. That's why today I'm speaking to every one of you, not as a celebrity, not as your new employer, but as someone who believes institutions don't get to define people by appearance." A wave of quiet spread through the branches. This isn't about one moment. It's about every moment after it. What you choose to see when someone walks through your door, how you greet them, what assumptions you reach for, what dignity you either extend or deny. He leaned slightly forward. "I won't stand for a system that treats humans like checklists." Keanu then tapped something off screen. A window opened for all employees to see. It was the termination notice for Brian Holloway. Official, irrevocable. Signed by Keanu Reeves, CEO. "I'm not firing Brian because I'm angry. I'm firing him because a message must be clear. We can't build a future of trust on the backs of unchecked bias." There was no applause, no dramatic sting, just stillness and clarity. And Leah, Keanu continued, softening, "I want to thank you for your courage, for your grace in the face of cruelty. You didn't raise your voice that day. You didn't curse. You didn't demand cameras, but your dignity told the story loud enough for the world to hear." At that moment, Leah's camera feed was spotlighted. She sat at her desk, wearing the same simple blouse from the day of the incident, tears in her eyes, dozens of tiny squares across the screen, filled with muted claps, hand-over-heart gestures, and quiet nods. Keanu let the moment breathe before continuing. "This company doesn't need a rebrand. It needs a rebirth," he said quietly, "and that begins today. Not with slogans, but with people." He laid out his next steps in clear, simple terms. Starting this quarter, every employee will complete a mandatory dignity and ethics workshop developed by real people, not consultants, not for compliance, for culture. He paused again. There will be no grades, no gold stars, but how you show up for others will be tracked. A few eyes widened across the screen. Keanu wasn't threatening. He was stating the new order of things. Not authoritarian, but unwavering. He then introduced someone unexpected. Asha DuPont, a retired nurse from New Orleans, whose own experience of being denied a mortgage 30 years ago on the basis of race and income had been buried in the bank's complaint archives. Keanu had found her through the civil justice group he'd quietly partnered with. She appeared on screen briefly, nervous but resolute, and shared a few lines. They told me I wasn't what a homeowner looked like. I never forgot that day, and now I guess someone else didn't either. The chat filled with quiet reactions, applause emojis, comments like, "Thank you for speaking," and "We see you." Keanu returned to the screen. Every time someone is silenced, a system survives. That ends now. We don't need heroes, we need listeners and builders. He looked straight into the lens again, speaking slowly. I'm not here to be your boss. I'm here to be your proof. That line hit hard, not because of the words, but because of the man saying them. Keanu then took a beat, not a dramatic pause, but a breath. A moment of stillness that said everything words couldn't. Then he nodded once. Dismissed, he said, ending the call not with authority but with quiet certainty. The screen went black, but the ripple had already started. Within hours, clips of the video call leaked online. Not by Keanu's team, but by employees who felt something shift. Comments flooded in from the public. Not just praise for Keanu, but stories. Stories of bank tellers who'd looked away, of grandmothers denied small loans, of young entrepreneurs turned away because they didn't look the part. It wasn't just about one incident anymore. It was about everyone's. And at the center of it stood Leah. No longer a footnote, but a figure of quiet change. Later that night, after the call, Leah received an email from Keanu. No subject line, just one sentence. Character is not a performance, it's a pattern. And underneath, a single photo. A handwritten sign now displayed at the front of every Goldshire Trust branch. You are welcome here, exactly as you are. No logo, no slogan, just truth. And that was all she needed. Leah sat alone in her apartment, the lights off, her computer still glowing in the corner. Her hands trembled slightly as she replayed the final few seconds of the company-wide meeting. She had been silent the entire time, camera on, mic off, frozen in disbelief. Keanu had called her by name. He had looked directly into the screen and thanked her, not as a gesture, not as damage control, but as a man who saw what the world had tried to overlook. That was what undid her. Not the public recognition, not the justice against Brian, but the genuine respect wrapped in quiet gratitude. She didn't know whether to laugh, cry, or sit there forever. Her phone buzzed on the table. She hesitated before answering. The screen simply read, Keanu. She picked up with shaky fingers. His voice was steady, gentle. You okay? She blinked. Her lips moved, but nothing came out at first. Then she whispered, I think so. There was a pause on the line, but not an uncomfortable one. Then he spoke again. I'm not finished. Her breath caught. I need you to come into the office tomorrow, 9 a.m. I'll be there. She nodded instinctively, even though he couldn't see her. Yes, of course. When the call ended, she stared at the ceiling for a long time. Her chest felt tight. Not with fear, with something else, something heavier, responsibility. And a question she couldn't shake. Why did he want her there? Her nerves didn't let her sleep much that night. She replayed every possibility. Was this about a new job, a promotion, or was he going to ask her to speak to the press? That terrified her most. She didn't want the spotlight. She didn't want a platform. She just wanted to do her job, be treated with respect, and disappear into her work like she always had. But something told her that wasn't going to be enough anymore. The next morning, she arrived at the office in Midtown, nervous and early. The receptionist greeted her with a smile that wasn't performative. It was genuine. The staff at the front desk knew who she was now, not from a viral video, from the meeting. From the tone Keanu had set, she was escorted to a private floor, the kind reserved for top-level meetings, and led to a quiet lounge overlooking the city skyline. A tray with coffee and warm croissants was already waiting. No assistants, no hand. Just one chair beside another. 5 minutes later, the elevator chimed. Keanu walked in. He wore the same dark shirt from the meeting. His hair was tied back and he looked rested, composed, and utterly unbothered by the morning press swirling outside. "Hey," he said, giving her a warm nod. "Hi," she replied, rising to her feet. "Sit," he said, motioning gently. "I just wanted to talk. No cameras, no scripts, just a conversation between two people who had walked through fire in different shoes." Leia took her seat again, feeling her breath steady for the first time in days. Keanu poured her a cup of coffee without asking, just as she liked it. No cream, 2 sugars. It startled her how much he remembered, how much he noticed when others didn't bother to look. "I want to ask you something," Keanu said after a moment. Eyes focused on the skyline, not her. She waited, heart pounding. "If you could redesign how banks treat their clients, especially people who don't look like they walked out of a boardroom, what would you do first?" Leah blinked. "Excuse me?" He turned to her then, calm, serious. "If we build something better, we don't just punish the system but reimagine it. What does that look like?" She looked down at her hands, unsure. "I mean, I'm not qualified to—" "You are," Keanu said, interrupting gently. "You're the one who was ignored, judged, and you still showed up to work every day with grace. That makes you qualified in ways no Ivy League resume ever could." Her throat tightened. "I'd start with how they talk to people," she said quietly. "That's where the harm begins. The tone, the smirks, the assumptions." He nodded slowly. "I'd train them to ask better questions, not, 'Are you lost?' but, 'How can I help you today?' Because people carry enough shame into banks already. They don't need more." Keanu listened carefully, not taking notes but letting every word land. "That's good," he said. "That's exactly where we start." She tilted her head, trying to make sense of what was happening. "Start what?" "I'm not just buying a branch, Leah," he said. "I'm rebuilding its soul, and I need someone I trust to help lead that." Her eyes widened. "Me?" He nodded. "I want you to help draft the new values statement, the employee onboarding program, even the architectural redesign of how we greet clients when they walk in." Leah's face went pale. "I've never done any of that." He smiled, leaning back. "Neither had I, the first time I directed a movie, or wrote a speech, or started a foundation. But I knew why I was doing it. That's what matters." Silence filled the room again, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that changed lives. "You were humiliated in public," Keanu continued. "Now I want you to help create a model that prevents that from happening to anyone else." Leah's voice broke when she finally spoke. "I don't want revenge." "This isn't revenge," he said. "This is restoration." Her eyes shimmered, the weight of years softening in an instant. "I'll try," she whispered. Keanu reached across the table and handed her a small folder. Inside was a proposal. Her title? Director of Human Experience and Ethics Integration. Above, her signature line was a handwritten note. "I believe in you. Now let's make the system believe in everyone." Outside the glass windows, the city kept moving. But inside that quiet office, a revolution was beginning. Not with noise, but with two people who understood the cost of being dismissed, and the strength it took to rewrite the ending. The following morning, Leah arrived at the downtown Goldshire building with a cautious heart. The skyline reflected off the polished windows like it always had, but something about the place felt different now. Like the weight of the story behind those glass walls had finally shifted. She straightened her blazer and stepped into the lobby. This time, no one questioned her. No one sneered. The security guard nodded with quiet respect and directed her to the top floor. As the elevator doors opened, Leah's breath caught. The hallway, once sterile and corporate, now bore subtle touches of human warmth, framed photographs of small business owners, a corkboard full of handwritten notes from customers and employees. A banner at the end of the hall read, "Dignity starts with us." She reached the conference room where Keanu was already waiting. He stood by the window, coffee in hand, his suit simple but crisp. When he turned, the warmth in his eyes immediately disarmed her nerves. "Morning, Leah," he said gently. She nodded. "Morning, Mr. Reeves." He gestured for her to sit, then slid a thick envelope across the table. "Before you open that, I want you to hear something first." Leah braced herself. "I meant what I said yesterday. You reminded the world that character isn't about suits or leather-bound portfolios. It's about how we treat each other when no one's watching. You didn't just walk into that bank. You walked into history." She looked down, overwhelmed. He continued, "I'm not here to fix a PR problem. I'm here to build something better, and I can't do that without you." With trembling fingers, Leah opened the envelope. Inside was a formal offer. Director of Ethical Practices and Customer Experience, reporting directly to the new executive board. Her lips parted. This can't be real." Keanu leaned forward. "It is, and it's not a title. It's a mandate. Every new hire will be trained by you. Every frontline decision will come through a policy your team writes. I want every customer, regardless of shoes, skin, accent, or balance, to feel seen, not screened." Tears welled in Leah's eyes, but she held them back. "Why me?" "Because you lived it," Keanu said. "And because your grandmother once helped my mother when we had nothing." Leah froze. "Wait, what?" Keanu smiled. "Lucia Alvarez, your grandmother." Her hand covered her mouth in shock. Leah's mind raced as Keanu said her grandmother's name. Lucia Alvarez. The woman who had raised her, told her bedtime stories in Spanish, and taught her that kindness was never wasted even when no one noticed. Keanu leaned back, giving her space to process. "Years ago, my mother was struggling. She was a single parent, working 2 jobs and barely holding it together. We lived in a small apartment, and some weeks there wasn't enough for groceries. Lucia was our neighbor. She wasn't rich. She wasn't powerful. But she saw my mother's struggle and never looked away." Leah felt her heart tighten. I never knew you knew her." "I didn't. Not back then," Keanu admitted. "I was just a quiet kid who noticed that sometimes a bag of rice would show up at our door, or that my sister had a clean dress for school, even though my mom hadn't done laundry in days. Your grandmother never asked for thanks, she just helped." Leah wiped a tear from her cheek. "She used to say, 'A small kindness can travel far if you let it.' I always thought it was just one of her phrases." Keanu smiled softly. It traveled farther than she ever imagined. He then slid another document toward her. This one bore the heading, "The Lucia Alvarez Financial Dignity Initiative." Leah's breath caught. "I'm launching a nationwide program in her name," Keanu said. "It will fund financial literacy workshops, provide low-interest community loans, and establish mobile banking units for underserved neighborhoods, places that banks have ignored for decades because the profit margins weren't big enough." Her hands trembled as she touched the paper. This is too much. I'm just a person who got thrown out of a bank." Keanu's expression turned serious. "No, Leah. You're a person who stood up by not standing down, You carried dignity when others tried to take it. That's leadership." She looked up, her eyes filled with a mix of fear and fierce gratitude. "I'm scared, Keanu. I don't know how to build an initiative like this. I don't know how to run corporate training programs. What if I fail?" Keanu nodded slowly. "You will. We all do. But failing while trying to change something is better than succeeding at maintaining what's broken." He paused, choosing his next words carefully. "Leah, I'm not asking you to be perfect. I'm asking you to be the first." That line settled into her bones like a truth she had been waiting to hear her entire life. "I want your grandmother's name to stand for more than the kindness she gave in silence," Keanu continued. "I want every family she would have helped to feel it now, through you." Leah's voice was a whisper when she finally responded. "Okay," Keanu smiled, not a victorious grin, but a quiet, respectful acknowledgement. "I'll have Claire and Omar work with you on assembling your team," he said. "You'll have full autonomy, no red tape. If you need resources, you'll have them." Leah felt the weight of the moment. It wasn't the kind of weight that crushed. It was the kind that grounded. For the first time, her grandmother's legacy wasn't just a memory and family stories. It was becoming a movement. "I think Lucia would have been proud of you," Keanu said gently. Leah smiled through fresh tears. "She'd probably scold me for crying at work." Keanu laughed softly. "Then let's give her something to really smile about." He stood, offering his hand, not as a boss, but as an equal. When Leah shook it, she wasn't just accepting a job, she was accepting a mission. Leah's first day in her new role didn't begin with a press conference or a flashy executive memo. It began with a notebook, a simple, spiral-bound notebook where she wrote down the smallest details that most companies overlooked. The receptionist, who smiled too much when someone rich walked in but barely made eye contact with an elderly customer. The tone of voice used when explaining fees to people who didn't speak fluent English. The subtle, unspoken cues in dress codes, office decor, even seating arrangements. She saw it all, and she wrote it down. Her office wasn't some glass tower corner suite. Keanu had given her the choice, and she picked a workspace on the 3rd floor, right beside the employee break room. The message was clear. She wasn't here to oversee people from above. She was here to rebuild from within. The first few weeks were hard. Not everyone welcomed the changes. Branch managers who had spent years climbing the corporate ladder were suddenly being told by Leah Martinez, a woman they once overlooked, that their approach needed a complete overhaul. She didn't come in with lectures. She came in with questions. What do you think it feels like to be turned away because you don't look like you belong here? What would you do if that happened to your sister, your daughter? Some deflected, some fumbled, but some listened. Leah started with small workshops, gathering groups of 10 to 12 employees from different departments. The workshops weren't mandatory at first, but word began to spread. She wasn't there to scold. She was there to show them what they had never been taught. She shared real stories, not just her own, but testimonials collected through Keanu's social justice partners. Anonymous at first, then, as people grew braver, with names and faces. The security guard who once denied entrance to a man in a construction uniform, only to learn he was the CEO of a major engineering firm, whose interest bed was polished enough. The single mother who had been denied a small business loan because her business plan wasn't polished enough. Despite having tripled her projected income in her first year, Leah didn't point fingers. She pointed to possibilities. What if we became the bank that doesn't get those stories wrong? Within a month, the tone inside Goldshire Trust branches began to shift. The changes Leah introduced weren't dramatic at first glance. There were no slogans plastered across walls, no corporate videos celebrating diversity. Instead, she altered the very foundation of how employees interacted with People Heap. Give Heap replaced the standard sales scripts with flexible conversation guides. These guides didn't focus on selling products, but emphasized understanding a client's needs. Instead of pushing credit cards and premium accounts, employees were trained to ask one simple question: what's the best outcome for you today? Leah introduced a mentorship program, pairing new hires with senior employees, not based on tenure, but on empathy. She didn't care how many accounts someone had opened. She cared how many customers they had treated with dignity. Some of the older staff members were resistant, at least at first, but as they saw customers respond, staying longer, referring friends, even writing thank you notes, the resistance softened. One particular breakthrough came during a session with a branch team in Queens. The branch manager, Marsha Patel, had been skeptical of Leah's approach. She considered the bank's issues to be overblown media narratives. But during a training exercise, Leah asked Marsha to role-play as a customer, a single mother applying for a small personal loan after being turned down twice. At first, Marsha laughed off the scenario, but as Leah gently walked her through how it felt to be on the receiving end of assumptions, something shifted. By the end of the session, Marsha's entire posture had changed. The next morning, she emailed Leah a list of outdated branch procedures she wanted to revise. The next morning, she emailed Leah a list of outdated branch procedures she wanted to revise. Marsha became one of Leah's strongest allies. Stories like this multiplied across branches. Complaints about customer discrimination began to drop. Emails of appreciation started to fill inboxes, and, slowly but surely, Goldshire Trust began to repair its fractured reputation, not with marketing campaigns, but through the quiet power of changed behavior. Leah never sought recognition. She didn't post updates on social media. She declined interviews when media outlets reached out, preferring to let the bank's evolving culture speak for itself. But word of her work couldn't be contained. Within 6 months, Goldshire Trust saw a 37% increase in returning customers. Small businesses that had once sworn off big banks came back, citing the new policies and Leah's publicized initiatives as the reason. Keanu watched from a distance, rarely stepping into the spotlight, but always present when needed. He had promised Leah that she would lead, and he kept that promise. He didn't micromanage or steer. He supported OWN Afternoon. As Leah was reviewing client feedback reports, Claire Nomura entered her office with a soft smile. "You know, the board just got a report from the Department of Financial Practices," Claire said. "Goldshire's customer satisfaction rating is now the highest it's been in 15 years. They specifically mentioned the reduction in discriminatory complaints." Leah leaned back in her chair, processing the weight of that statement. Claire placed a small envelope on Leah's desk. "And this came for you, from a customer." Leah opened it carefully. Inside was a handwritten note. "Thank you for making me feel like I belonged in a bank for the first time in my life." There was no signature, no contact information, just those words. Leah placed the note beside a framed photograph of her grandmother, Lucia, which sat on the corner of her desk. "That's why we're here," Leah whispered. Once a symbol of elitism and exclusion, was now being studied by other financial institutions as a model of inclusive banking. Reports circulated through industry networks about their policy shifts, their ethical training modules, and the measurable impact on client retention. And yet, for Leah, the true success wasn't in statistics. It was in the woman who didn't flinch when asked about her income. It was in the elderly man who smiled when greeted by name instead of being asked if he was in the right place. It was in the young mother who sat with a loan officer who listened, not judged. Keanu called Leah one evening, his tone casual, but with that undercurrent of thoughtfulness she had come to recognize. "You did it," he said. Leah smiled softly. "We did it." But Keanu wasn't finished. "We've built a better culture," he said, "but now it's time to make it bigger. Other banks are watching. It's time we give them a blueprint they can't ignore." Leah knew what that meant. The next chapter wasn't about Goldshire alone. It was about transforming an industry. But for now, in this moment, she allowed herself a quiet victory. Not one of headlines or accolades, but of small, meaningful shifts in how people treated each other. Lucia Alvarez's kindness had traveled far farther than anyone could have imagined. The air felt different that morning. Leah stood outside the Goldshire Trust Fifth Avenue branch, staring at the same glass doors that had once closed behind her with a final, humiliating echo. But today, there was no weight on her chest, no burning in her cheeks, just a quiet sense of completion. She hadn't planned on coming back, not for closure, not for vindication, but something had drawn her here. Maybe it was the quarterly report she had just signed, showing the branch's highest customer satisfaction rating in years. Or maybe it was something simpler, a need to see with her own eyes what change looked like in the place where everything had once collapsed. Taking a breath, Leah walked inside. The marble floors were still gleaming. The high ceiling still echoed footsteps. But the atmosphere was unmistakably different. And more than just the footsteps. Maybe Mr. Douglas was just ready. The smiles at the reception desk were genuine. The greetings were warm, not performative. No one's eyes darted up and down, scanning her clothes or calculating her worth. She joined the line without announcement, just another customer. And it felt right. A young teller at the far counter caught her eye. He couldn't have been more than 22, his name tag reading Aiden Patel. When their eyes met, he smiled. Not the empty politeness she remembered, but a smile that recognized her. As Leah stepped forward in line, she noticed a mother and daughter waiting ahead of her, the little girl, maybe 5 or 6, swinging her mother's hand, swinging her tiny backpack with impatience. The moment the girl's eyes found Leah, she beamed and gave a small, enthusiastic wave. Leah's heart softened. The mother turned, slightly embarrassed. "I'm sorry, she's very friendly with everyone." Leah smiled. That's a beautiful quality to have. When it was her turn, the receptionist didn't ask for identification before greeting her. Instead, Aiden stepped around the counter. "Ebbs, Martinez, it's an honor to meet you in person," he said softly. "I've read your training modules twice. They changed how I approach my job. Thank you." Leah's throat tightened, but she kept her composure. "Thank you for choosing to be here, Aiden. This place is what we make of it." He nodded, then gestured toward the open floor. "Would you like a tour?" "I'd love to show you the community board we just launched." Leah agreed, feeling the strange but welcome sensation of being invited into a space that once rejected her. Aiden guided Leah toward a wall near the customer lounge. Instead of promotional posters or charts of interest rates, the space was filled with photos, handwritten notes, and community success stories. "This is the Dignity Wall," Aiden explained. "We ask customers to share their experiences, moments where they felt seen and respected here. It's become one of the most visited spots in the branch." Leah scanned the notes. One was from an elderly man who wrote, "I was never comfortable in banks until this place treated me like a neighbor." Another was from a young immigrant couple who had just opened their first business account, thanking the staff for explaining the process patiently without judgment. Each story was a reflection of the vision she had written months ago in her small third-floor office. But seeing it alive, growing through the voices of customers, was something far beyond a policy success. It was human. As they continued the tour, Leah noticed subtle touches that hadn't been there before. Private consultation rooms for clients who needed sensitive conversations. Multilingual signage. A redesigned seating area that was welcoming, not clinical. "Did you have a hand in these changes, Aiden?" she asked. He smiled, a little shyly. "I had ideas, but it's the culture you created that made it possible for those ideas to be heard." They passed by a window where sunlight streamed onto a small display case. Inside was a photo of a woman in a simple dress, holding a basket of groceries. Leah froze. It was her grandmother, Lucia Alvarez. The caption beneath the photo read, "Kindness, when given freely, becomes the foundation of dignity." Aiden noticed Leah's reaction and gave her space. She approached the display, touched the glass lightly, and closed her eyes for a brief moment of gratitude. Lucia's quiet acts of kindness had found their way into the DNA of a financial institution that once thrived on exclusion. As they made their way back to the main floor, Leah noticed the little girl from earlier, still in line with her mother. The child caught Leah's gaze again and waved with even more enthusiasm. This time, Leah knelt down to her level. "Hi there," Leah said softly. The little girl smiled, revealing a missing front tooth. "Are you the boss here?" Leah chuckled. "Not the boss, just someone who wants to make sure everyone feels welcome." The girl's mother smiled, gratitude in her eyes. "Thank you for what you're doing. Places like this used to make people like us feel small." Leah stood, feeling the full weight of those words. They weren't said with bitterness, but with genuine appreciation for the change. In that moment, Leah realized that impact isn't always loud. Sometimes it's as simple as a child feeling safe enough to wave, as ordinary as a customer being treated with decency, as profound as a grandmother's long-ago kindness finding its echo in a modern bank branch. Hayhert leaving, Aiden handed Leah a small envelope. "This came in yesterday. We thought you should have it." Inside was a card with a handwritten note. "Dear Ms. Martinez, I wanted you to know that last week I came into this branch expecting to be ignored. Instead, I was greeted with a smile, offered a chair, and treated with respect. It's a small thing, but it meant everything. H. We're optimistic, preferring to play up all the disorder rather than thank you. For believing banks can be different." Leah tucked the note into her bag, her heart full. As she stepped back out onto Fifth Avenue, the city buzzed with its usual noise. But for Leah, there was a quiet clarity in her steps. The place that had once tried to diminish her now stood as a testament to what persistence, kindness, and a refusal to accept injustice could build. Keanu's words echoed in her mind. "You don't have to be loud to change the world. You just have to be steady." That afternoon, Leah returned to her office. Not with the weight of unfinished battles, but with the quiet joy of seeing seeds grow. And as she passed her Dignity Initiative team, she smiled, knowing that every customer who walked through those doors from now on wouldn't be judged by their shoes, their accent, or their paycheck. They would be seen, they would be valued, they would belong. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across Fifth Avenue, softening the sharp edges of the city's constant hustle. On the stone steps outside the Goldshire Trust branch, Keanu sat quietly, elbows resting on his knees, his hands folded loosely, as if holding something invisible. He wasn't wearing a suit today, just a plain charcoal gray sweater and dark jeans. No entourage, no cameras, except for the one reporter standing a respectful distance away, notebook in hand, uncertain whether to approach him. Keanu didn't mind the hesitation. He had built his life in the space between noise and silence, and this moment was no different. Finally, the reporter found his courage. "Mr. Reeves?" he asked, his voice cautious but sincere. "After everything, the acquisition, the backlash, the changes, was it worth it?" Keanu looked up slowly, his expression unreadable at first. Then came the faintest hint of a smile, not smug, not victorious, but knowing. "Every second," he said quietly, "because silence isn't weakness, it's preparation." The reporter tilted his head, intrigued. "What do you mean by that?" Keanu's gaze drifted across the street, watching the rhythm of city life, people coming and going. Some rushing, some strolling, every one of them carrying stories no one else could see. "People think silence is empty," Keanu continued. "That when you don't react, you're being passive. But silence is where you gather your thoughts, where you sharpen your understanding, where you prepare to act. So that when you do, it's not impulsive. It's precise." He gestured toward the branch behind him. What happened here wasn't about one moment. It was about all the moments that led to it. Leah's strength, Lucia's kindness, the arrogance of those who thought respect was a luxury item, all of it converged right here. The reporter scribbled notes quickly, sensing this was the kind of moment that would make headlines. But Keanu's tone wasn't meant for headlines. It was meant for people who knew what it felt like to be judged silently and had chosen to respond not with noise, but with quiet, relentless resolve. A small group of pedestrians paused nearby, recognizing Keanu. They didn't crowd him. They didn't ask for autographs. They simply watched, as if knowing something meaningful was unfolding. Keanu looked into the camera lens, his voice steady and calm. To anyone who's ever been underestimated because of how you looked, how you dressed, or how quietly you carried yourself, your worth isn't up for negotiation. And it never has been. Keanu's words hung in the air, their simplicity giving them weight. The small group of onlookers seemed to breathe differently now, slower, more intentional. The reporter lowered his notebook, no longer scribbling, just listening. Keanu stood slowly, brushing invisible dust from his jeans. He glanced up at the towering facade of the bank, once a symbol of exclusion, now in the process of becoming a sanctuary of fairness. The irony wasn't lost on him, but he didn't need to explain it. Actions had already spoken. "There's a power in letting people underestimate you," he said, his gaze now meeting the reporter's. "It teaches you patience. It teaches you to watch, to listen, and when the time comes, to act in a way that leaves no doubt." The reporter cleared his throat. "Mr. Reeves, you've said very little publicly during this entire process. Why now? Why speak today?" Keanu smiled gently. "Because today isn't about me. Today's about the people who kept showing up, even when the doors were closed to them. People like Leah. People like my mother, and people like that little girl I saw earlier, waving at a stranger with no fear in her heart." He paused, then added, "Silence is strategy, but when you break it, it better mean something." The camera crew, who had been respectfully distant, now captured every word, every quiet moment, understanding that this wasn't a soundbite, it was a reflection. Keanu gestured toward the steps where he stood. "This spot right here," he said, his tone softer, "used to be a place where Leah Martinez sat crying, humiliated for daring to carry a check that didn't match her shoes. But now, it's a place where employees step outside to have conversations about community projects. It's a place where customers are greeted with dignity, not suspicion. It's a place that remembers." A soft breeze stirred the city air, rustling the leaves of a small tree planted near the branch entrance. Leah had chosen that spot herself during the renovations, insisting that something living should grow where her dignity had once been trampled. Keanu's voice deepened as he addressed the camera again. "I want to ask you, anyone watching, have you ever been underestimated because of how you looked, how you dressed, or how quietly you chose to carry yourself? Have you ever been dismissed, not because of your abilities, but because someone decided you didn't fit their picture of success?" He let the question hang, giving space for reflection. If you have, share your story in the comments below. Let the world know that dignity isn't worn, it's lived. And every time we speak up, we chip away at the walls that keep people out of places they belong. He turned, preparing to leave, but then paused, his eyes narrowing thoughtfully. "One more thing," he said, turning back to the reporter. "Leah's story isn't finished. It's just one chapter in a much bigger book. So tell me, what incredible story should we take on next? What injustice is waiting for a quiet response that roars louder than noise?" The reporter's face softened, understanding that the interview wasn't just for the news cycle. It was a call to action, a gentle but firm reminder that the fight for dignity was far from over. Keanu descended the steps, his stride unhurried, blending back into the rhythm of the city. The cameras followed him for a moment, but the focus shifted from his figure to the bank entrance behind him, now bustling with customers of all kinds. A mosaic of humanity, each person treated with care, regardless of their clothes, their job titles, or their accents. As Keanu disappeared into the crowd, the video feed lingered on the small plaque near the entrance, inscribed with a quote Leah had chosen. Dignity is not granted by others. It is affirmed by how we choose to treat each other. The screen faded to black, but the message remained. Underneath the video, a prompt appeared: "Have you ever been underestimated because of how you looked or dressed?" Share your story in the comments below. Your experience matters. A second prompt followed immediately after. What incredible story should Keanu take on next? Let us know below. Together, we'll keep building a world where dignity is never negotiable. The story didn't end with applause. It ended with an invitation for everyone watching to choose how they respond when silence is broken. Not with noise, but with meaning.